Interviews. There we go. All right. So we should have the guys with us as well. Should have the audio. Oh, no. I remember what happened last time, and I'm going to change it so it doesn't happen this time. There we go. That should fix it. All right. So welcome to episode 5 of the Road to Arc podcast, guys. Today we've got James from James Paints. You can see his Instagram over here on the right. I'll actually just copy and paste that into the chat for people if they want to follow him. You're probably already following him. He's got 20k followers, so there's a very real chance you'll already be following him. We've also got Marvin with us, and we're going to be asking James all about his experiences at Arc and, you know, how we got into the hobby. How you doing, James? How you doing?
Doing good.
I'll just turn that audio down. Love to hear it. Yeah, so I guess for people that don't know, because there's going to be people in chat that I'm sure that know you, but for people that don't know, how did you actually get into the hobby? Are you one of the people that started with Middle Earth? Because that seems to be one of the main ways for people to get in the hobby.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big Lord of the Rings fan as a kid, but yeah, I mean, I don't actually exactly remember how I got into it. I was very, very young, maybe like 7 or 8. I think my grandpa might have bought my older brother one of those little army models of like a Spitfire or something. He was in the Air Force, and that might have been like first exposure to models, maybe just building and stuff like that. Then I think it was just back when there was a Games Workshop in Eastland, like, you know, mum and dad would be shopping or something, and me and my brother would go in there and have a look, and, you know, just really liked it. And yeah, I think I was 8 maybe when Lord of the Rings came out, and yeah, big into fantasy and orcs and dragons and all that, and seeing that stuff, you know, in the shop was cool. And yeah, I think my dad he bought my older brother a set of Tyranids, and I went with orcs, 40k orcs. Yeah, maybe at 7 or 8, and that's where it started.
So do you know what
That
edition that was at all? Like 4th edition, earlier maybe?
Well, I'm 31 now, so yeah, I would have been maybe 8, so maybe 23 years ago. I have no idea what edition. I didn't play until I was a bit older, and I don't think I played correctly, maybe ever. I try to now. I don't even know how.
I'd say there's a large amount of the population that don't play correctly as well. So
yeah, like me and my mates used to play on the carpet and stuff, but I don't think we really knew the rules.
Yeah. And so you started with orcs, but obviously now you're a Tyranid. You got tons and tons of Tyranids.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Was it because of your brother? Is that what got you into the nids?
I don't. Maybe. I mean, versing him in the game as a kid, it definitely seemed like they were really powerful because he'd cheat all the time. So,
yeah.
I remember he had the Red Terror, that little model that was like, you know, this big.
Yeah, the Ravener.
And in the war, it was supposed to be so much bigger, and so, you know, you'd finally kill it, and it had this rule where it'd fall over and, you know, crush like half your army. So, but yeah, I don't know. I stuck with orcs for a long time, and I think I painted orcs until I was about 13 or 14. Very poorly. I didn't have any skill at all in that regard, and, you know, didn't know about thinning paints or anything like that. So I remember I did enter a painting competition when I was really young, some Young Bloods thing at the shop down in Ringwood.
Yeah.
And I remembered thinking that my model was amazing and that I was going to win for sure. And I didn't win, and I found it many years later, and it was atrocious. So I think it had just about every colour on it imaginable. But yeah, I think probably around 15, I sort of exited the hobby for a while. I was playing drums in a band, and I started MMA. I started competing, fighting. And just didn't really do Warhammer for a little while. And I think you go through that stage maybe as a teenager where, you know, you're like, oh, that's lame or whatever. And then, you know, you get older and you're like, who cares? So, yeah, I think around 18, me and a good mate of mine bought I think I was about 18, the Assault on Black Reach set. And we were like, hell yeah, let's get back into it. And so he painted some Space Marines. I was doing Orcs again, and we were back into it for a little bit, maybe a couple of years. Yeah, then I think I faded out of it again for another good few years. Then around 25, I think I was watching a lot of painting videos on YouTube, and I decided that I wanted to try and paint well. Like I'd been interested in art from pretty young as well. I really like drawing and painting. And when I had painted when I was younger for Warhammer, it was more just like, paint models and then try play the game and play the game wrong. But it wasn't, really trying to actually paint well. So probably about 25, I decided, I wasn't interested in the game at all at that point. I had no idea what editions were going on or anything like that. I just wanted to paint some stuff. So I bought some sort of dragon. I think it was like a dark elf dragon or something. And I wanted to paint that to like a really high like display level standard. And so I was just watching YouTube and trying to learn. And I finished that project. I think it was a good like 120 hours or something into that dragon, and it still looks pretty good. It's it's not the best thing in the world, but I think that was my first time really trying to paint artistically. Then I tried to do another dragon, and I think I put over 100 hours into that, and I never finished it. And then I went on a holiday to Vietnam. By the time I came back, the spark for that dragon was gone, and I never finished it. I still have it. Then I just was out of the hobby for a while again. So I've kind of been in it for like a really long time, but I've had a lot of hiatuses.
Yep.
So about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, a few of my mates got back into it, and they were like, oh, there's like rumors that 10th edition is going to be more simple and all that. And I think a lot of people jumped back in on 10th. So we're kind of like, let's have a go. And I actually originally it was also seeing what was going on with contrast paints, which obviously didn't exist back when we were younger. And they just looked really easy to use. So I was like, cool, I'll get back into it and we'll play some games, and I'll paint some stuff with contrast paints and I'll paint them really quick and get an army done really fast, which definitely did not happen. I ended up sinking tons and tons of time into every model.
Yeah,
but
I was going to say that obviously, we're just scrolling through your Instagram. That obviously didn't happen. When did this
didn't last very long.
When did this Tyranid scheme come about? Like, was there
this was
initial test model for this, and then you were just like, yeah, that's it?
Yeah, so I did a test model. I think I did 2 test models basically in the same sort of scheme with a couple of little differences. It was inspired by a scheme I saw on YouTube. I can't remember the guy's name. It's a small channel, but I finally found the video again, and I did save it because I feel like that was my inspiration, and I have shared it every now and again just to, like, I don't want to claim that it was all me that sort of came up with it. Mine did end up very different to his, but it was kind of like a really dark blue skin and purple carapace. And so, I did a test model. Mine kind of looked nothing like. I was kind of actually trying to paint it more like his, and it just ended up looking nothing like his. But then I was doing like maybe a gaunt in like 40 minutes or something, like a little termagant, and I wasn't sort of painting to the standard that I currently paint to. And did 10 gaunts, did a few warriors, and then I think I started on my first big model, which was a hive tyrant that I had built maybe like 5 years ago in one of those times where I was back in the hobby. I think I did a few like builds that I never painted. It's a horrible conversion and I hate it. But anyway, I decided I was going to paint that. That was kind of my first big model. Then I would refine things a little on the scheme, and then I would go back and like touch up old stuff. And now it's like 3 hours per gaunt and 100 hours for a Norn or a Tyrannofex or something. So but I think it started with just painting, trying to do things like quick and have them look pretty interesting. And I feel like I did an okay job of that, but then I don't know, you paint one thing that looks good and then you want to go back and make everything else look good.
Yeah. So when was your first experience with Arc? So we've obviously, for people that don't know, James won last year's Best Painted. I've got the little the Instagram post you had there for winning best painted. So this is why we're talking a ton about painting. What was your first experience with Arc40k, and
That was my first experience.
so your first
Oh,
experience
really?
was last year, and you won
Yeah,
best painted. There you go.
yeah, I was pretty surprised. Yeah, no, I'd never heard of it. I had never competed in any tournaments or anything like that. A couple of my mates had competed in it in years prior, and they basically said that it was because I'm not very good at the game, and so and we just sort of play casually, and no one really cares too much about winning or losing. And a couple of the guys just said like, this is a tournament. It's a bit more about like painting and lore and having fun, and it's not so much about min-maxing crazy competitive lists. And yeah, I was like, cool, that sounds fun. I had absolutely no idea what it was until I rocked up on the day. I remember the night before finding out that you had to have objective markers, and I didn't have any, so I stayed up till like midnight making these little like glowing brain turtle things for objective markers. But yeah, I didn't even know anything about it really. I rocked up on the day not knowing where to go and not knowing what to do, and thankfully everyone was super accommodating, and yeah, it was awesome. It's such a cool event. Yeah, loved it. I definitely plan on. Well, I was hoping to go to all events in the future. I actually can't do the Sunday this year. I've got as a job, I'm a powerlifting coach. I coach people for squat, bench, and deadlift competitively, and so I've got a comp on the Sunday, unfortunately, and I won't be able to make it. So, which sucks because I actually was painting some stuff for my army this year, very much with the intent of trying to come back and do well. But I can't remember who I was talking to. I don't know if it was one of you guys. It was on Instagram, but someone said I might be able to come in on the Saturday and judge some stuff, which would be awesome. So hopefully I can still be there.
You're probably talking to Dan or
Yeah, he mentioned the same thing to me on the weekend that yeah, he was asking you to do some judging, which would be awesome to see.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, if I basically messaged him and I was like, man, like I'm super bummed that I can't come. So is there any way that I can be involved? And yeah, hopefully I can judge. I'll just have to. I'll have to make sure I don't judge any of my mates' armies because I feel like that'd be a little bit cheating.
Well, that's a good way to go into it, to not have a bias.
Yeah.
But I would trust anyone who says something like that to still judge everyone's army. If you can admit that, that's fantastic.
So
I'm curious.
Some of their armies are really, really good too. So I wouldn't want, and I've probably seen them, more up close. And I think, yeah, in an environment like Arc, maybe you've got a minute or two to look at an army, whereas I've seen like every little detail, and they really are impressively painted. So there'd probably be a bias, even if I tried not to have a bias.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm curious though. So, being so long in the hobby, have you still got any of your original models, or have they slowly dwindled over the years?
So I don't have any of my original ones. I think I sold them all on eBay at some point, and they were all absolutely horrendous anyway. They were borderline just dunked in paint. But I do have some orcs from when I came back, 18, 19. I do still have most of those, and they look okay. They don't look like my current stuff, but they're not terrible. And I do still have the dragons that I painted.
Yeah. So do you ever look back at them and see how far you've come since? Ever put like your oldest model and your newest model next to each other, sort of thing?
Yeah. Even looking at although I've updated all the Tyranids for this army, like I've gone back and fixed things, I still have photos of my first like test model and stuff like that. And even just in that year and a half, it's a massive difference. Yeah, I feel like actually spending a lot of time painting and really putting the hours in, notice a huge difference in a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
So, as last year's best painted and someone that paints a heap of one faction, because scrolling to your Instagram, it is just synthwave Tyranid after synthwave Tyranid.
Yeah.
Advice for people that struggle. So there's obviously a lot of people that struggle out there to stick to one project.
Yeah.
It can be a bit of a grind. I think be completely transparent with people too. Be honest. Are there times you're painting the army and you're not loving life? Is there times you're just like, this is not something I'm enjoying, but there is a purpose?
100%. Yeah, there's definitely times where I don't want to paint. I think particularly, I feel like the last 20% of any project, um, especially before I bought gloves. I paint with gloves now, and if you're painting a project in sub assemblies or fully assembled, if you don't have gloves and you're like 80 hours into holding that model, you're definitely taking paint off, and it's super frustrating. Then like going back and fixing an area, and then you've taken paint off somewhere else, and or you drop a model. It's like so infuriating that you want to quit. That definitely happens. And also, I have had projects where I've just sort of burnt out on and just not wanted to paint. And sometimes it does become a grind. And I guess it's a little bit up to you. Like, I don't think you should necessarily force yourself to push really hard and do something you don't want to do. For me, I don't mind that. I think, yeah, like I said, I coach powerlifting. I've been powerlifting for like competitively for 10 years. And especially doing it drug tested, you really hit a point where you don't really make much progress anymore, and you're working really, really hard for very, very, very little return. And I don't mind that. Like, I don't mind just going through the motions and doing stuff that I don't particularly love for the end result. So yeah, I've had projects where they've become sort of unfun and I'm like not very happy with them. And then in that last couple of hours, especially I feel like when you finish basing a model and then you're like, oh, that actually looks really good now. And maybe even a few hours prior, maybe 90 hours in, you were like, oh, I don't even like this. And then in the last 10 hours, all of a sudden it's something that you're really proud of. So yeah, I mean, for me, I'm happy to stick to stuff even when it's like not my favorite thing to do. But I've definitely gone through that probably with almost every project, especially all the big bugs, because they take so long. So most of them there's been some amount of painting that I haven't particularly wanted to do. And maybe you hold out for like the fun parts, painting like weird. I love the bioluminescent kind of stuff. I love doing OSLs. So I'll sort of like I think I'll sort of stagger my painting where it's like I'll save another fun bit to do.
I was going to ask,
and then I'll do another.
that was going to be one of the questions I asked. So we've got two questions from the chat. My question was going to be, do you break up areas? So I have the same painting marines, and it's not always the same area, but for instance, I'm painting the Sanguinor right now, and the big purity seal ribbons are something I'm not looking forward to painting. I suppose there is a process to it though sometimes as well. Like you're saying, handling a miniature, you might want to paint a certain area before you move on to the next, in order to handle it less. But we've got a question here from Black Sword, and he said you've absolutely mastered purples and blues. Look, I haven't seen many other types of miniatures on your Instagram other than the NIDs. So I guess it's a two-part question. Have you painted anything else recently that wasn't a NID? And if that is the case, are there any colors that you don't typically go near, like whites and yellows? Black Sword has asked.
Yeah, there's no colors these days that I don't like. There was back in the day. I feel like whites and yellows used to be absolutely horrendous and horrible to work with. I don't feel like that's the case anymore. These days, I'm perfectly happy to paint in any colors. I just paint my army because I like it. But I've done a couple of other projects, still Tyranids, but like painting something in somebody else's scheme for like a little event thing or a prize thing for a competition in one case. And I really enjoy doing that, doing something like breaking it up a little bit and painting something else. I haven't painted anything non-Tyranid since I've come back to the hobby a couple of years ago. So that means I haven't painted anything non-Tyranid in probably 6 or 7 years. But I'm perfectly open to doing that, and I would like to. I think initially I was kind of like, I want to get 2,000-3,000 points. I want to have like a flexible enough list that I can not only play games, but I'm not playing the exact same thing every time.
Yeah.
And then I feel like when I probably am at that point now, I'm over 3,000 points now. Probably at a point now where, I don't like need to paint stuff to be able to play games. So yeah, I wouldn't mind painting something else. I'd love to try some non-metallic metal stuff, just because it looks challenging, but maybe something small, or it'll take a billion hours. But Yeah, I don't think I've ever painted a Space Marine in my life other than one airbrush test model many years ago when I bought my mate's like half broken secondhand airbrush, and it didn't go very well. So, but I'd really like to paint a Space Marine just because they're so iconic for Warhammer. So I definitely plan on doing that. Whether it ends up being some sort of Tyranid V Space Marine diorama or something,
Yeah.
or yeah, eventually I might.
Tyranids has to make it on there somehow.
Yeah, somehow. I also have some Necrons, and I do plan on painting some up. A couple of my mates play boarding action, and I don't have a list for boarding action, so I've been thinking about doing some Necrons. I don't think I'll do them non-metallic metal. I think if I do another army, I want it to be a not super time-consuming army. Although I don't know, maybe it'll end up being like that.
Darren Latham talks about that. Have a passion project, and then have
Yeah.
another project that you still enjoy, but you can paint miniatures at a faster pace, so that you do get that progress, and you can play with them. We've got another question here from Sauncey, and he has said, "Do you have a massive Titan bug? And if you do, how do you start something like that? And what standard would you get it to?" And I think your standard would obviously match the rest of your army, so that would just be an absolutely insane project.
Yes, I have a massive Titan bug, and that's why I haven't started it. Yeah, I definitely will be doing it. I've bought a Hierophant Bio-Titan. I've done some conversion work on it, some green stuff work. The whole thing's built other than one leg still needing to be pinned. So it's ready to go. The thing I'm most worried about is the base. I feel like it's going to take an obscene amount of time, and I'm going to need to buy a really large base. So I've been looking at MDF board and stuff like that, figuring out what I want to do there. But once I get a base sorted, I will be doing that. I think I'll end up just painting it to the same standard as everything else.
Yeah.
I think it's less detail like per square inch, let's say. It's still a very detailed model, but I don't know, when you look at like a Neuro Tyrant or something like that, there is like an insane amount of detail like per square inch. So I don't think it'll take an amount of time proportionate to its size.
Yeah.
Like,
there's
you know,
slightly different aesthetic from Forge World as well. So
yeah. So I think my Tyrannofex took me about 100 hours to paint. And I guess the Hierophant's probably 5 or 6 times bigger than that. I don't think it's going to take 500 or 600 hours. I think it might take like 200. I think it'll be a really long project. It probably is one that I'm going to have to break up.
Yeah.
It's obviously I'm going to paint it in parts, like all the legs and arms separate because it's so massive. I'm just worried about the torso of it because like highlighting the Norn's torso almost killed me. It was just doing the edge high. I think it was 25 hours of edge highlighting just on the torso area. And that was killing me. Like that was like, put a podcast on and grind out 4 hours and then do it again and again and again. And it was very tough to get through.
The Battleforge Gaming podcast.
Obviously, yeah.
So we've got another question here, and you do a lot of OSL. And Static has asked, how do you push your OSL so hard without the fear of it blowing out, if that makes sense? Now, I'm assuming, you've painted a ton of OSL now, so it's definitely a process that sort of comes a bit more natural. When you were first starting, how did you tackle that initial OSL?
Yeah, I think OSL is one of those things that people think you can't really do without an airbrush. I don't think you should wait until you have money to start trying techniques. So I didn't buy an airbrush for a long time. The first OSL I did was on my first squad of Zoanthropes, and I just did it with dry brushing. So it doesn't look quite as good as the others for sure. And it's a little bit trickier because you can get that dusty look. It doesn't look quite as smooth.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I love doing OSLs. I don't find them super hard, especially with an airbrush. They don't seem like the kind of thing that's that complicated to me, unless you're doing particularly complicated OSL setups with multiple lights. Or I think really subtle OSLs are actually quite hard. let's say you are doing like non-metallic metal armor or something and you want really subtle counter reflections and stuff like that. I do think that stuff is hard, and really subtle glazing and stuff like that. The OSLs that in my army are not like that at all. They're really, really like high glow,
Yeah,
which I
it
think
probably
actually makes
suits your army a lot in terms of like that OSL. So it might,
yeah, I think in terms of like painting an army in general, I think it's good to have like at least one color that really does stand out. So for me, that's that greeny sort of turquoise color. Yeah, I mean, if I'm doing them these days, I'll pretty much just airbrush white on the area and try and hit all the areas where I think that color would be hitting from the source.
yeah,
Then I will go in with sort of a glaze consistency, turquoisey, greeny sort of color. I end up mixing it a little bit different every time. I feel like people always ask me like, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I don't have like a super rigid process. I kind of just like, because
Eyeball
otherwise
it.
I get a bit bored. So I sort of like mix other new colors in each time and
yeah,
see how it goes. But
yeah. It's just naturally
yeah,
grown over time, and you can't tell because there's just a bunch of different models there anyway.
yeah,
So
they're all greeny or bluey or something. So they're close enough. But yeah, I'll just airbrush whatever color I want over that color, and then I'll go white again through the airbrush in like a very, very concentrated area, and then maybe green blue again over that. I'll generally go in with a really, really thin like glaze consistency, blue or purple, depending on where I'm doing the OSL, and just clean up a little bit. I don't have like some crazy, crazy good airbrush. So sometimes there's a little bit of speckling and stuff like that. I'll usually clean that up before I do any of the final sort of highlighting, and just get it looking good enough. And then I just, the same way that I edge highlight things like carapace, I just edge highlight anywhere where the green might be touching. And yeah, it doesn't feel very technical to me. It doesn't feel like it's just. I think because the glow is so over the top, it's not so subtle, so it's not so hard. But as far as worrying about like blowing it out or making it look too bright or too this or too that, I don't really care. I just do it and see how it looks. And if it looks a bit much, I'll just like bring it back a little bit. I make mistakes all the time. Like there's whole areas that I've painted over that I'm just not happy with. Yeah, I just risk it, see how it goes. And if I have to clean something up or airbrush, you can always just airbrush it a little bit darker if it's too bright.
Yeah.
And I like really, really high saturated OSLs. I don't tend to do them like nearing towards white. So they're not actually that bright. Maybe some of them look really bright, when I'm taking photos in a photo box with a big light on them and all that. But they are like bright, but they're nowhere near white. They tend to be like very, very saturated, which I think also is more lenient. I think the closer you get to white, I don't know, painting white on a model always. I don't tend to use white anywhere really, like pure white, unless it's the tips of teeth or something. I feel like pure white tends to just look a bit funky.
yeah, yeah. We've got
Yeah.
another question, which you did sort of already answer. Blacksword was asking, have you got an idea for your Necrons on how you would try and paint them? Because he's asked non-metallic metal. He said, obviously, not because you want
Your
to
intentions
paint them
are.
quicker. So
Yeah.
have you got?
Yeah,
Is there
non-metallic.
like you got a what do they call their what do they call their chapters? Oh, geez, I can't even think. A dynasty. Have you got a dynasty in mind, or are you going to do a custom?
It'd be custom for sure. I don't know enough about the lore and all that. Yeah, like with Tyranids as well. I think right off the bat, I wanted to do something unique. I do know like most of the main sort of Tyranid ones, but I feel like Tyranids are maybe the most flexible army in terms of painting in 40k. They're probably, I think, almost every army is somewhat anthropomorphic, even if they're alien. And Tyranids are just really alien. Like they're so out there. I think you can paint them however you like, and they can still look good. So I wouldn't want to be. I think what draws me to Tyranids is that there's not many limitations on what you can do, and I feel like with Necrons as well, I would want to try not to limit myself too much, and try and just paint whatever I feel like. I'll end up looking at a bunch of other people's work for sure, as I do with my Tyranids as well. Yeah, if I have any ideas, non-metallic metal would obviously look the best. I think, yeah, then I'll end up spending just so much time per model. So I definitely wouldn't start doing that. Maybe down the line it'll happen by accident, but I'll attempt not to. I'll probably end up doing, yeah, some sort of dark metal and maybe some like blue tones in the metal, just dry brush it or whatever, and then just do a lot of OSL because I like it. It's fun. So I'll probably, rather than doing the sort of green OSL that I do with the Tyranids, I might choose magenta, purple, pink, that kind. I really like those colors as well, and I use them with the Tyranids when I'm doing these little acid pools on the bases. I find that to be maybe the easiest color to get a really, really saturated OSL. Blue seems to be really hard. I don't know why. Like bluey green is fine, but straight blue I find really hard to get super saturated. Magenta and pink and all that, it just seems so easy to do, and really easy to get it to look good. So I'd probably do, yeah, some sort of metal color, maybe blue in the metal just to contrast with the pink, and then probably pink OSL.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We'll
beautiful.
go back to a bit of Arc because that's why we are here. We've chatted a heap about your
I did
painting.
actually have
Okay, yeah.
one question for
you go. You go. Yep.
So you mentioned, obviously do a lot of airbrushing and stuff before, and you started off with the dry brushing first. It's at least what I hear a lot of is that people are quite cautious getting into airbrushing. Obviously, there's a cost aspect. Were you also cautious getting to airbrushing? And is there any recommendations that you would have for people getting into it?
I wouldn't say I was so much cautious because, yeah, I don't really worry so much about making mistakes or painting something that looks bad. You just learn and try again. But I'm nowhere near as good at airbrushing as I am at painting with a brush. Not even close. I'm still nowhere near as good with an airbrush. I would still consider myself very beginner. I stuff up stuff with an airbrush all the time still. I accidentally like spatter something somewhere and get really frustrated. And so there is that, and I understand that people are apprehensive with that.
So
I just think that
on that point,
most mistakes.
on that point, because that's a very good point you make, and it's a very hard point to get across to a lot of people that are in the hobby. There are a lot of people that are apprehensive because they do have a fear of failure to the point where they don't even begin.
Yeah.
And I guess this is more just me making a point. It's not even a question. If you look at all the models James has painted to the standard he's painted, and he said multiple times that he has made mistakes and he goes back to fix them, I think that's just a really good thing to take away. If you take anything away from this little interview, is people make mistakes and they just continue. It's all a learning process. I apologize for interrupting there, but I think it was just a very good point you made, that you still stuff up and still continue with your amazing looking miniatures.
100%. Yeah, still stuff up a lot. And yeah, I mean, the old saying goes that people who succeed fail more times than most people even try. So you really have to just give it a go. Like with an airbrush, it might be worth. I did one test model, I think, where I just painted a gaunt with base coats, and then I just airbrushed glowing things all over it to just see what would work and what wouldn't work. But yeah, I mean, if you're worried about stuffing up, you probably will. So just stuff up, and that's fine. And most mistakes can be fixed. And maybe don't, like, if you've worked on a model for 100 hours and then you buy an airbrush and you want to do glowing eyes on its face or something, maybe that's not a good idea for like the first time, in case you stuff up something that's really important to you. But yeah, just like stuffing up is part of it. And even if you like, I'm sure there's people way better than I am with an airbrush and with a regular brush. You also just stuff up sometimes, not so much due to painting skill, but yeah, maybe you dropped a model or something, or or your airbrush spat out a bunch of stuff. Sometimes it's out of your control. Mistakes will definitely happen. I think fixing mistakes. I think you just, like, if you make mistakes, just try and fix them, and you'll realize it's not that hard. I think you make a mistake and it looks like it's going to take 5 hours to fix, and it takes like half an hour, and you're like, oh, it wasn't even that bad. So
I just think they're an experience to learn from every time. What did you do to make that mistake? How did you rectify it to not make that same mistake again? I still do it today on streams. I'll film a tutorial. We did it with the ultramarine tutorial that came out recently. I think it was the secondary edge highlight I did on the armor. It was just the wrong tone, and I just went back and like I obviously didn't complete the whole model, but I did like a leg, and I was like, this is not the right color. I don't want to lead people the wrong way, so I changed it instead of continuing with the tutorial. So it still happens to everyone. It still happens.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you're really lucky, your mistake looks better than you intended.
Yeah.
Sometimes
sometimes they're happy mistakes, right?
Yeah, the old Bob Ross happy little accidents.
Yep. Back to Arc. So your first Arc last year. What was, apart from winning the best painted, what was one of the your favorite experiences, or maybe favorite opponents from last year?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of everybody, but honestly, I don't know if I just got lucky or if everyone there's just super chill. But everyone I versed was awesome. Everyone was clearly just there to have fun. You know, no one brought hyper competitive lists, or even if they bought competitive lists, they were clearly intended to be fun. You know, like I think you can have a competitive list that's enjoyable, and you can have a competitive list that's horrible. I don't know if any of you guys ever played Magic back in the day, but you know, I played a little bit back in the day, and you can have really competitive decks that are fun. And then you can have these horrendous control decks where nobody else gets to play really. So yeah, I think Arc was not like that at all. Like everyone was there to have fun. And it was just really fun, just meeting people and playing games and learning, because I think there's maybe misconceptions that if you have a well-painted army that people think that you're really good at the game. Maybe because you're experienced in some way. Definitely not the case with me. So it was cool playing with other people and having them sort of help me along the way. I feel like I wouldn't say I'm a good player now. I at least mostly understand the rules now, but even at Arc, I was still like hardly knowing what I was doing. I was just rocking up to give it a go and hoping that people would be very, very accommodating, and they were. As well, like, you know, my army's mostly painted as a display army. Almost all my bases are the wrong sizes. You know, I like really big display bases and stuff like that. I was worried that in a tournament setting, people would be not a fan of that. No one cared. Everyone was just like, cool, whatever, let's have fun. So it was a really, really enjoyable event. I versed, I think it was Shane, who I was speaking to before, who had this Imperial Guard army with a bunch of flyers in it. And it was, just super fun to play against. I hadn't versed like big planes and stuff before. So yeah. And I tried to bring like a really, really non-competitive list.
Yeah.
And Crusher Stampede at the time was winning at like a 20% rate or something like that. So I was like, hell yeah, I love, you know, big bugs. I'll bring Crusher Stampede. But it's still actually, I think it did well because it's a little bit of just like a stat check army, I guess, which I hadn't thought so much about. But I think if you have a lot of big stuff, it's still hard to kill. You know, even if the army in a hyper competitive setting would do really badly because people would just outscore you. But I don't know. I really loved the whole thing. I absolutely didn't think I was going to win. I walked around and looked at everyone else's armies, and there was some extremely well painted armies. I knew after the first day that I had been shortlisted or whatever. Like I think I was in the top 15 or something, and so were two of my mates that I came with. And so we were like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, and yeah, when they were announcing the top 5, after they said 5th place, I was pretty much like, all right, well, I'm not going to be in the top 4. So, but yeah, I was very surprised to win. It was definitely cool. But yeah, just meeting people, playing games, having fun. It was, for someone like me who has no tournament experience, Arc is like the perfect event. It was just, everyone was just super chill. You know, you don't know this rule, you don't know that rule. It doesn't matter. Like everyone's just having fun and trying to figure it out. And someone will ask their friend, you know, what do you do with this or what do you do with that? Yep. Very, very, very beginner friendly. And like I said, I might be okay at painting. I'm absolutely a beginner when it comes to the game. So, yeah, it was awesome.
That answered a question that I was going to ask, and it was going to be any tips for people that are thinking about going to Arc that have never been. James was a
just
first
go.
time. Just go. He basically just spelled it out for you as to why it's such a fantastic first event to go to, even if you've never been to an event before.
So you don't need to study or prep, unless
Yeah.
you forget your objective markers.
For people in chat, think of a few more questions because we will wrap it up shortly because we've nearly pushed our way to an hour here. So if you do have any more pressing questions for James, chuck them in chat now. Are there any other events that you're looking to go to at all? Is there anything overseas that you want to go to? I'm sort of setting myself the goal of going to a no retreat because the past two of our past three guests have been to no retreat, and it's something I've wanted to do. Is there any events you would any dream events you would like to go to?
The only one that I think of that I want to go to is Arc. I know I played down at General Games in Churnside a bit, and I think they're doing some beginner leagues and stuff like that. I wouldn't mind doing that, but I also I work a lot and I have a lot of other hobbies as well, and I don't have a crazy amount of time for that stuff. I also just don't know heaps about it. I feel like one of the really weird things about having an Instagram page that has a lot of followers, I think people ascribe this idea that you know what you're talking about and that you're super ingrained in the hobby in all aspects. And I'm not really. I watch a lot of YouTube videos with painting, and I talk to a lot of painters on Instagram now just from having the page. But I couldn't even tell you the names of any tournaments overseas or anything like that. I don't really know. But yeah, like I said, I went to Arc having no idea about it and really enjoyed it. So that's sort of the one that I think about wanting to do each year. Other than that, it would just be, I play games with my mates here and there. And if there's little tournaments locally, happy to give that a go. But yeah, I don't know so much about overseas travel or anything like that. I think if there's anything that I could get across to, beginners who are watching, same thing with, do you want to wait until you've got an airbrush before you start doing OSLs or whatever? Or I think I still feel like a beginner most of the time. I'm just a very, very, very patient beginner, and I put a lot of hours in. And I think when you put a ton of hours into something, it looks good. But I mean, I bought a painting lamp a year ago. The first year of painting this army, I was painting in my back room, and the lighting is horrible. And so with my mates, there was kind of this running joke that the reason my OSL stuff looks so bright is because I'm painting in the dark. So I've got to compensate. But yeah, I don't really have a ton of fancy gear or anything like that. I don't really know the names of whatever brushes I'm using, and they're not that great. And maybe if anyone else has some recommendations, I could get some better ones. But I just think just start and just give it a go and make mistakes and have fun. And you don't have to have all this fancy stuff or be super knowledgeable. I don't think. I think if you just enjoy it and your mates enjoy it, then just give it a go and take your time. And I don't think there's anything that I do that the average person can't learn. I don't think I have any, you see some Golden Demon level people that obviously have some inherent intrinsic genetic ability to how they view light and stuff like that. The people who really are next level, and probably we're not going to be like that. But I don't paint to that standard. I paint really, really high contrast that looks really good from a foot away and it looks pretty good up close, but I'm not painting anywhere near to the standard of those guys. I think you can get stuff looking really, really good without that innate biological ability that some artists have. I think you can do really, really, really well by just, learning a couple of things, watching some YouTube stuff. Maybe I was watching the stream just before this started, and, you're painting up really close. You can see exactly what you're doing. I think watching stuff like that's really useful. But I think almost everyone can do it if you're patient. If you want to paint a really big model and you're going to put 3 hours into it, of course it's not going to look insane. And if you want to do that, that's fine. Some people love playing the game, so they want to paint stuff really quick and just get it looking good, and nothing wrong with that at all. But if you do want to get something to look really good, at least for me, I think you just have to spend the time and just it's a slow process.
Yeah, as someone says in our stream, trust the slowgress. Trust the slowgress. It's you're obviously a phenomenal painter, and I think it's just one of those things. you put the time in, you put the effort in, and the will and the drive to want to improve. And, you can get to a point where you are content with your painting. Like you said, with the powerlifting and stuff, you get to a plateau, and sometimes you're happy with your plateau. You might be happy where you're at. You don't need to push it any further, but it does just come down to the absolute time and effort that you put into your miniatures. I'm sure when you first started, like you said, your OSL wasn't where it was now. It was dry brushed. Your edge highlights probably weren't as consistent as they are now, but
Definitely not.
the more you paint, the better it gets. And in terms of you saying that you sometimes don't know what you're talking about, I feel like in this hobby, if you do chat to people and try and help them with their hobby, I think sometimes you can have a little bit of imposter syndrome where you feel like you don't know what you're talking about because you are comparing yourself to people that, paint Golden Demon and stuff like that. And I often just think, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to my stuff. And I'm sure you know what you're talking about when it comes to your stuff. So, I think you should have confidence with your being asked your questions and the brushes. People might just enjoy the brushes that you use and they want to replicate what you're painting. So, if you give them your advice, then they can't go wrong, right?
Yeah, and I don't feel a sense of imposter syndrome or anything like that in terms of I never feel bad about my work or anything like that. I do think that my stuff looks good. I'm always happy with it when it's done. But I mean, that's another good point. Finish your projects, because I've had projects that I've really hated and thought they looked terrible. And you get to the end and they usually look pretty good if you've spent the time. So it's not that I think that the stuff that I do looks bad. I usually think it looks good. I just think that it's not that talent intensive, I suppose. I think it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, but I really think the average person can do it. I don't think it's some crazy impossible thing. I think when you first start, obviously your first model's not going to look that good, and you can look at somebody else's stuff and just be like, wow, that's just impossible. I can't do that. Maybe that's the case for insanely high level stuff. I feel like you can get to a pretty damn high level with not a ton of skill. Like you learn stuff and you learn what colors look good together and you just spend the time. So yeah, I think it just takes a lot of time.
Yeah. So we've got one last question here, and Heresy for Heretics makes a good point. It takes a lot of effort to make something look effortless, which is really, really good. Sauncey is asked, was it an easy choice with your basing scheme? I know that someone having a contrasting base as opposed to the thematic ones to match their models. So yeah, your bases obviously match your models, like they tie in very well. It's not hyper contrasting because it's using the same sort of color palette. How'd you come up with the basing scheme?
Yeah, well, I guess the scheme in general, it was partially inspired by the movie Annihilation. I love cosmic horror stuff. I loved that sort of rainbowy, shimmery, bioluminescent looking stuff. I like the idea of things looking very alien. Like I don't use any metallic components anywhere on the bases. If something's standing on like a pipe or a brick or something, I always chop it off. I think I just I actually started out with my bases looking quite different. They were much more just grey. They were sort of just grey, sort of stone-looking bases. And I started using those little alien tufts. I just bought them at the shop and thought they looked cool and gave them a go. It was about halfway through my army that I started, doing that sort of green-coloured base. And I guess the idea was just that I wanted the Tyranids to look as though they were on the kind of planet that they would have evolved on. And I figured if they're supposed to be bioluminescent, if they're you would imagine that they would have to be out of camouflage, I guess. So I just started. I think the first time I did it, I literally took every primary contrast paint that I use, which was like Leviathan purple, Leviathan blue, Eldari emerald, Croxagore scales, I think it was pretty much that. I literally just dumped them all over the base, just like splotched them on, and then just dry brushed a bit of like grey green over it, and just having all those colours sort of congeal together. Yeah, I figured I'll just put all the colours from the model onto the base and see how it looks. And I really liked it. I thought it looked way better than the grey. So I've gone back and updated almost all of the bases from my older stuff. Actually, still haven't finished all of them yet. But yeah, it kind of was just an accident. I think my Neuro Tyrant was the first model that I did that on. Just started putting different colours on the base and having a go. But yeah, high contrast bases are really cool. I think unfortunately my scheme would be a bit messy with that. It's already got quite a few. Like starting out, I wanted it to just be the dark blue, dark purple with the high contrast edge highlights and like a single bright bioluminescent color. Already I've kind of introduced using bright pinks and stuff as well. I think introducing another contrasting color would definitely be too much. Sometimes I already wonder if it's a little too much. So
No, I think they're perfect,
yeah,
my dude. I think they're perfect.
yeah, thanks, man. But yeah, so for me, having less contrast on the base, I think was better. And I guess it made sense from the perspective of them being aliens or whatever. But I think if you're only using sort of one or two colors primarily, then maybe a high contrast base would look better, but it'd probably be a bit too many colors for mine.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I think that brings us to the end, guys. Thank you very much for joining us, James. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And you too, Marvin. Thank you very much. Right. If anyone has missed this stream, I know I didn't ask a few questions because they already got asked during the stream. This will be re-uploaded onto YouTube for everyone to watch. And next week, we're going to be joined by the person that's running the Middle Earth. So, yeah, that'd be fantastic. So, yeah, again, thank you very much, James. Thank you, Marvin. We will switch back over to the normal stream and I'll say goodbye to you guys in the other area. All right. We'll be back in a sec, guys. See yous.
Thanks for having me.